السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Better, alhamdulillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So today's topic or several next coming weeks, it's a several part topic. And as the title we mentioned in the on the flyers and right now after the prayer, it is navigating the LGBTQ narrative. Now, before I start, there's a couple of, I guess ahead of time, whether it's warning or so we'll be on the same page. This is not going to be a spiritual talk, obviously, right? But this is going to be a very intellectual, heavily intellectual class, which will probably not be suitable for 15 years, I'll say 13 years and under. 15 years, they may be able to grasp it, 16 years old and above, but is heavily intellectual and sometimes even philosophical. And we're going to explain why, because what we want to do in this series, but also another warning, just before I forget, because of the nature of the talk, right, the nature of the topic itself, we will be using certain terminologies that some people might feel uncomfortable with. But that's the nature of the topic. When it comes to certain details, Islam does not shy away from it, right? We have to understand that. The Prophet ﷺ himself would sometimes speak about things he would not normally speak about, but for the understanding of the religion and position, he would say certain things. So I'm just gonna a warning ahead of time, so people will not have, or would be on the same page. We should be on the same page of what's gonna happen, perhaps. So if you have kids with you, right, be ready to having to explain things if they ask you questions at home, right? Just a fair warning. So that being said, the reason that this is going to be very intellectual, because I don't want to address this as a one-time thing without giving its proper depth, because we really have to understand when we're talking about navigating the narrative, we have to understand that the current narrative of the LGBT did not come without historical roots, right? Without a specific worldview and paradigm that shaped it and directed it, and without certain catalytic events that happened that resulted into all of this occurring. And at the same time, for us to be able to navigate, we understand that, but also understand the other side, which is more of the Islamic perspective and where this comes from, right? This is really important because when we start addressing this topic with non-Muslims or even with Muslims, we have to understand where they're coming from and how we're being able to navigate this, because they tend to take the narrative in a specific direction, and I'm going to explain further, right? And because of how they take it or perceive it or understand it, it's not going to be surprising why in the recent years this topic has very much taken center stage, whether at the political or ideological stage. Anytime there's an election, this topic is heavily addressed. Anytime there is a form of discussion or law that seems to restrain certain behaviors, it is discussed and brought up. Realistically speaking, if you just take a statistical approach, right, so you can understand how things are, which direction they're heading, if you take a survey of the number of books that mention this aspect, right, that the author mentioning LGBTQ characters, including children books, they are exponentially increasing, right? It's a lot. We're talking about publication, even children books. The LGBT characters that are portrayed in media, movies, or cartoons also has drastically increased. It's almost unavoidable, right? You can no longer watch even a cartoon without some sort of that idea or a character that indicates this one way or another, and that is done on purpose. Right? There's a reason for that. The LGBTQ narrative has also, permeated the at the institutional level in several states. And institutional level, I'm talking about lawmaking, right? Not just that, but also including the education in elementary school, that it became mandated in several states that LGBT education is integrated into the curriculum, right? Whether starting at the elementary or even sometimes a bit earlier than that, right? Just through simple storytelling, for example. Not just that, but even Muslim countries who should have nothing, should really have nothing associated with this, have grown to become under pressure to become a bit more LGBT affirming. Qatar in the World Cup. Everybody remembers that, right? You guys watch it, or you don't care? Most of the people watch it, right? And what's had been in the news the most here was not the soccer games, was it? Do you guys watch it? Did you watch the soccer games or the news? I hope both, right? What was mostly brought in the news? That's a question for you. What was brought in the news? Huh? Okay, no alcohol being served. What else? Not LGBT friendly. Now the question is, what does this have to do with soccer? It's a simple question, right? But there is an agenda, and even teams, they would react in a specific way and advocate certain things, and people standing in front of cameras. This was done on purpose, right? Because they are wanting more Muslim countries to be LGBT affirming. Okay, we're at the point where the LGBT movement, not only seeks to radically reshape society at a domestic level, but now what we're looking at is a neo-colonial project, right? This is more of a neo-colonialism. Like they're trying to, colonization in the past was physically colonizing a country. Now it's more of an intellectual aspect, right? The whole ideology of West, of what they, what they think is moral, what they think should be the standard, is being forced on other places, other countries that have different moral systems. Right? It is a form of colonization, but that's the reality of what's happening. It became almost like a warfare, but it's more of an intellectual warfare, and it got to the point of, the Western thought is putting itself in a position, or take it upon themselves, that we are the leaders and we are on the right, and we want to spread that good with you, whether you like it or not, even if we have to colonize you intellectually. Okay? They're the superior and we are the inferior. How can you not be a bit more of modern thought? That is the whole process, right? So this is why this is important, and this is why we need to go in depth, right? So the second question is quite often people say, listen, this has been discussed a lot, why are we even discussing this topic, okay? Well, for one, the reason behind it is because it doesn't stop anyway. It's always going to be pushed through. And the minute we stop discussing it is the minute that the truth, or what is right, is going to be, reversed. What is right and wrong is going to be reversed, right? There's no longer that whole discussion and pushback. So that's why it has to be a continuous conversation, but also continuous education. This is why we're talking about this. Other than the fact that if we stop talking about it, now once again, this talk is meant really for the adults, right, and young adults perhaps, so that they'll be able to navigate their way with their peers, but also it is the younger generation that we're worried about. And because this thing affects the younger generation more specifically than anything else, because there are various misconceptions and secular worldviews that are being absorbed by the youth, which result them into accepting LGBT secular narratives. Okay? It is no longer surprising to find LGBTQ Muslim association. Right? People, they're surprised. No, you should not be surprised, because this is now what they are being, what they buy into. It's no longer surprising to find MSAs in colleges walking in pride parades and supporting them. It is not, because they don't think it is wrong. Why? Because these misconceptions and specific worldviews have been unconsciously absorbed without being challenged, without being directed properly. right? So it's not necessarily their fault. I'm just saying it's not their fault. They are partly at fault because they did not go out and seek the proper Islamic education, worldview, foundation, but it's also partly whether it's their parents or their community or the Islamic Center or Islamic schools, or even us as a Muslim putting out the proper narrative and discussions. It is all our fault, right? And so we need to correct that. Now, as a result of this, right, now we're having these individuals in large numbers with that misconception and a bit of a Western worldview of things. It is no longer sufficient to respond to the question of, I think I'm gay, what does Islam say about this? Right? So this is a question that happens. These people who are, might be afflicted with this, they'll say, I think I'm gay, what does Islam say about this? Quite often the response is very short. It is, what do we respond usually? It is what? Huh? It's haram, right? Period. Do you hear anything else beyond that? Yes or no? Yallah. Come on. I need you guys awake with me. I know I understand. I said this is a very intellectual topic, but doesn't mean you have to turn into zombies, okay? We say it is haram, okay? Now, the person who's asking this question in this scenario, however, is asking. So what they're asking about more is of an individual and political identity, right? That is mainly situated in a paradigm without truth or metaphysics, right? Meaning without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the center of it. So this is where the idea is coming from, right? So it's a paradigm. That question is coming from an individual who lives in a society that has a paradigm that views sexual feeling as being as close to absolute, unquestionable truth as one can get. Okay, so how would you even question this, right? This is my sexual tendency. Why are you, this is me. Why are you saying something else? So this is what they're coming from. This is what they're feeling, essentially. And so the average, I shouldn't say the average, but many of the college-going American Muslims who generally champion a lot of liberal causes in the name of justice and love, and to say that being gay is haram is almost in their mind the same as saying being Arab or South Asian is haram. Now we can disagree on this, but in reality, they are equal in their mind. I'm going to explain why through the slide discussion. That's why I said this is going to be very intellectual. Why this is happening, and it might not be apparent from our first session today, but inshallah by the second session it will be clear of how we're going to discuss this. طيب. So essentially what you're going to see when they do that, there is obviously a clear miscommunication between the two views, right? Because each one of those individuals on each side is operating from a different paradigm, right? Whether it is the Western paradigm or the Islamic paradigm. So on the one hand, we obviously have the Islamic worldview as it pertains to morality. The morality associated with gender, sexuality in particular, but generally speaking, morality. And on the other hand, what more of the Western or modern or postmodern secular view that is associated with morality, associated with these things. And because we have to understand that the two start at opposing assumptions, like directly opposing assumptions. Each one of them starts at directly opposing assumptions, which makes sense that they will reach opposing conclusions. It's unavoidable, right? Most of the time it's unavoidable. When you start with two opposite assumptions or set assumptions, you will reach two opposite conclusions, right? So I'm gonna give you a statement, right? And this is, although hypothetical, this is really how the discussion would go. And this has to do, with the current modern secular worldview of morality, as penetrated in the mind of many of the college-going and young adult Muslims, that it results in becoming more sympathetic towards this LGBT narrative, right? Becoming more sympathetic towards it. So you will hear quotes such as this. Like, this is an individual who seems to have identified themselves as part of the LGBTQ movement. And I'm going to make this statement. I want you guys see if you can pinpoint certain things. But the way it's stated to them, that seems like a logical argument. But there's certain things that are going to be highlighted in that, like you should be able to pick it out, hopefully, okay? So this is, I'm going to quote this, right? So this person would say, right, I feel this way internally, right? I feel this way internally. Therefore, I am inauthentic. I am an inauthentic person unless I'm allowed to live my life according to this feeling. And if the Muslim community doesn't accept my sexual orientation, then they are rejecting me and undermining my identity as a person. Okay? Now, this is a very realistic quote, by the way, right? It's not something that is unheard of. This is what is kind of like, mentioned. So, the question is, I want you to look at this, and we should be able to learn how to be able to discuss this. We need to be able to identify the conceptual, ideological values of this individual, right? We have to figure out what their, conceptual, ideological values that they have, so we can able to understand what's happening. Okay, so here's the quote again. Okay, I feel this way internally, therefore I am an inauthentic person unless I am allowed to live my life according to this feeling. And if the Muslim community does not accept my sexual orientation, then they are rejecting me and undermining my identity as a person. So what are the conceptual ideological values that they have? Like, this person is like we can't deny that this person is passionate about this, right? And they have very strong views about this, and they feel personally attacked when we tell them that this is not correct. Okay? Because in their mind there are certain pillars that have been established. If you reject it, you're rejecting that person. All right? So what are these things? Okay, so feeling, all right? Good, freedom to act upon whatever they feel, right? So that is equated to choice, right? Freedom of choice. All right, what else? Sorry? Moral values. I think moral values is across the board. Everybody has moral values. You're headed in the right direction, but it's what are these moral values, right, that they're highlighting? So, freedom of speech. No, this goes beyond more of freedom. Do you guys want me to tell you the quote again? See if you can pinpoint it one more time? Yes? Type. I'm going to say this one last time, okay? I feel this way internally, therefore I am an inauthentic person unless I'm allowed to live my life according to this feeling. And if the Muslim community does not accept my sexual orientation, then they are rejecting me and undermining my dignity as a person. Sorry? No, they don't care about community. Individualism, right? But it's based on what? Authenticity, right? Authenticity is important. Authenticity is reflected in I must act upon how I feel, right? So authenticity is something that is important, but also they rejecting me. So who are you rejecting? The individual, the identity itself. That's how they identify themselves. So there's authenticity, identity, choice, but also they said you're undermining my dignity. Okay, so these are our conceptual values, right, that this individual has. These are things that are important to them, right? They are authenticity, obviously that's important for this person. identity is important for that person, choice is important for that person, and dignity. So if you see this, then it becomes easier to discuss all these things individually, right? At a more intellectual level. So your question then, well, what is identity? Right? And you try to figure out, okay, what's their thought process? What is identity? Are we on the same page of this or not, right? Do your like, preferences mean that this is your identity, right? Or is identity formed somewhere else? Dignity, what truly is dignity, right? How does it form? How is it violated? What does authenticity mean? When are you authentic? Like, are there boundaries? Are there no boundaries? Your choices, is there limitation, no limitation? All these things is where that discussion happens if we understand, right, their core, these individual core values, what's important for them, okay? So here's the question then. So if this person says, like, you need to respect my, like, respect me and respect, like, and respect my dignity, all right? So does this mean, like, we disagree with, like, with respect and dignity? Do we as Muslims disagree with respect and dignity? No, right? We can argue the entire, like, Sharia, part of it is to uphold the human, like, dignity in itself and not put it below its status or above its status, okay? So the answer obviously is no, but these terms are being used more in a very specific definition, right? To imply that if one does not fully endorse homosexual behavior, right, relationship, and family structure, then a person lacks respect for people's dignity. Okay? This is what it means, essentially. This is how it's being used. So if you refuse, okay, if you saying, like, you don't fully endorse it, then you have no respect for people's dignity, which in reality is a moral accusation. It's a moral charge. So we're being accused of morally not respecting people's dignity. That's more of a moral thing. Is that right or wrong? Can we agree on this? Yes? Right. Good. So essentially what is being used, so this is the basis, the springboard, okay? And really it's a form of bullying, right? It's a form of bullying that's being used. So it's a loaded terminology that is used as a tool for social and political demonization. That's what it is, okay? So essentially they're saying you are immoral for not supporting this. You're immoral if you don't agree to this. You're immoral if you're even discussing this. That's the reality of it, okay? So, at the present, the current LGBT discourse, as mentioned in the way we put it, is presented as a moral discourse. Is that right or wrong? Do you guys see that now or you don't? Right? This is why people are very passionate about it. This is why it's all being, like, brought in center stage. And we have to teach those kids. We have to, like, those backward people in the third world countries. We have to teach them what's the correct moral values. This is where it's coming from, okay? Because it's more of a discourse. And so essentially what we are given is to believe that questions surrounding sexual desire and behavior, family structure, and so forth, right? All these things are primarily questions of equality, dignity, autonomy, respect, and human rights, and that any opposition to these goals of the organized LGBT movement, then what it is, it constitutes an opposition to all these values. All right, this is how it's presented. This is why people are so riled up about it. So, that being said, because a large part of the LGBT narrative takes a moral discourse, it is important for us to first address, where does morality itself come from? Okay? Now, I'll be honest, I think this first session that we have should be treated as an introduction. Like, all this is just an introduction to kind of lay the foundation of where we're gonna head from later on, okay? So the question is, Islamically speaking, right? We have to, generally speaking, we have to address, where does morality itself come from? The whole idea of morality, where does it come from? So we'll look at the secular people, right? Secular thought. So the majority of secular thought, what is the source of morality for them? I'm going to take a really long break until you guys answer. Majority, like we vote on it? So what is the source then? Feelings, okay. Religion, really? Secular? Social, cultural. Okay, what's common between social and cultural? They're based on what? Based on what? People. Okay? So what is the source of morality in the secular worldview? Humans. Okay? As simple as that. They themselves, right, are the source of deciding what is moral and immoral. Okay? Now, if that is the case, does morality really exist then? That's why I said it's very philosophical, by the way, like heavily intellectual. Does morality really exist? And if you say yes, I'll ask you why. If you say no, I'll ask you why. There's no way out of this. I'm actually, because I want you guys to really understand this, right? Whatever, like, we're going to have this discussion. So, sorry? Okay, we have a conscience. So does morality really exist then? If the source is human beings? Okay, what is morality? Let's start with the definition. What is morality? Excellent, right? It is essentially, in basic terms, what is considered right and what is considered wrong. Good, excellent. Now, if the source of what is right and wrong is the human being, is there really a right and wrong? Okay, so we said, they didn't say no, but I heard a lot, I've seen a lot of this, okay? So yes from there and no from here. So let's have this debate now, okay? So yes, why yes? Okay. No, don't worry about us, Sheikh. I'm just saying, I'm talking about just you as the human being. If the human being is the source of deciding what is right or wrong, is there really a right or wrong? And you're saying yes. For those people. What about the other people? La, Sheikh, let's not confuse this. Driving on which side of the road has nothing to do with right and wrong. Sheikh, driving has nothing to do with morality. Okay, so based on the criteria that they have, we accept it as it's right or wrong. Is that what you're saying? For us, it's wrong. For those people, it's right. طيب. People who shook their heads. You're going to have to explain why your position. I saw two people shake their head, by the way. I just can't remember who it was. Okay. Thank you for like, you know. All right. So the argument over here, it does not really exist because if it's dependent on people and they change, what is right and wrong will change. Okay? Does right and wrong change? Okay. لا. Forget, يا شيخ, this, one. No. Let's separate between, right? Because we're talking about, because in Islam, we're talking about something different, okay? So if the human being, as it is, like think just plainly, if the human being is the source of right and wrong, can there be really a right and wrong? Based on your definition, it's a relative right and wrong. So truth is relative. Right and wrong has to do with truth, Sheikh. Exactly. Whose truth? So, good. Whose truth? So, is there really a truth and right and wrong? In reality, is there something that is like that? No, there wouldn't be. No. Has not to do for us or them. This can be even people from the same city, same town, same nurture, but because they base on what is right and wrong on their human thought, our thoughts will differ. So how do we determine truly what is right and wrong? In reality, can we determine that? It becomes different. So we cannot really, right, say I am right and you're wrong. Can you really say that? The best you can do is I respect your opinion, you respect my opinion, you're right in your opinion, I'm right in my opinion, let's all live together. Welcome to LGBTQ narrative. Right? When the human being, right, becomes the source of what is right or wrong, then it becomes subjective. If something becomes subjective, then there is no right and wrong in reality. Okay? We cannot argue this. I'm sorry, I know, once again, I warned you this is going to be very heavily intellectual from the beginning. I hope I'm not boring you guys. But this is the reality of it. When anything becomes subjective, right, we cannot decide if it's right or wrong. It is exactly almost the same as arguing which is better, vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream. Right? Can we have a fight over this? Yeah, somebody nodded yes. Really? Can you have a fight over this? Come on. If we're kids and children, maybe, right? But in reality, when you grow up, you're like, really, this is more like okay, fine, this is a preference, you like it, whatever the case is. This is in your world, the vanilla world, that's fine. My world is a chocolate world. You stay in your world, I stay in my world. We're all fine and happy, okay? No, it becomes subjective because it will also change over time. What changes over time can never be truly right or truly wrong. Because whatever is wrong back in the past might be true in the future. Whatever is true in the future now might be further down the line wrong. So what is truly right and wrong? There isn't, right? There is no room for debate. Now in Islam, on the other hand, what is the source of morality? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of morality, right? For Muslims, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes the ultimate source of morality. He is the one subhanahu wa ta'ala that tells us what is right and wrong, right? And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who does not speak out of his whims and desires, only through revelation, he's the one that also legislates for us what is right, what is wrong, right? Whether it comes from the Prophet or from the Quran, they're both from the same source. It is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran clearly, right? He said, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ ضَلَّ ضَلَالًا مُبِينًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse, He's clearly stating, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said that it is not for a believer, man or woman, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messenger decree a matter, that they should have an option in their affair. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do, or this is halal, then it is halal. If it's haram, then it is haram. If it's right, it is right. If it's wrong, then it is wrong. Right? It is complete submission. It is out of our hand. We don't dictate this. And so for us, right, we understand that the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what is best for us. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders something, what's best for us. And so it's taken out of our hand. Now in this case, then, for Muslims, we can always argue that we can have a moral code. The secular system cannot have, they can say they have a moral code, but it's not really morality, right? It's more of their preferences and choices. But for us, we do have a morality, right and wrong, because for us it's objective. Morality is objective. It does not succumb to our thought, does not succumb to our inclination, our desires. We don't change our mind in one time and say halal and the other time say haram. It is out of our hand, right? And so for Muslims, morality is something that is objective and not subjective. And so when a person tells you, how dare you say that this is wrong, you ask them, well, what is right and wrong? Automatically, they'll fumble. They're like, what do you mean what's right and wrong, right? Well, how do you determine justice? Why is your scale justice, right? Who put you as the center of the world? Why are you dictating what's right and wrong? These are fundamental questions that are not even brought up to the surface. It's just assumed that they are the right position. Okay? And they argue from there, and if you argue against it, then you definitely are wrong. Okay? So this is why we have to understand where this is coming from and how we can argue this. So, but anyway, so I'm gonna, how much do I have time? Type. So, from our perspective then, right, when we talk about from the Islamic perspective, the source of all morality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right? And if that is the case, it's not, we're never surprised as Muslims that we understand that whatever Allah ordered or the framework that He placed is what is right and what is best for us. And I'm going to explain why. Generally speaking, anything that is produced is connected with the traits of the producer. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody or not? Anything that is produced is associated with the qualities of the producer. Does that make sense or not? All right, good, excellent. So, if by nature, the human being, right, we are perfect, our intellect is 100% absolute correct, right? And so naturally, anything we produce will always be perfect in the way we produce it, right? And this is why when we produce laws, we're able to fight that this is justice. Are you guys awake or are you asleep? What's wrong with you people? You guys are agreeing to what I'm saying? I hope not. Our intellect is perfect? No. By nature, human beings are flawed. We're not, are we Allah? Okay, pausing means you don't know. Being silent means you don't know. Are we Allah? Good, excellent. Good, alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, it is normal. Human beings, we are limited in our intellect. We're limited in our thought process, our foresight. So naturally, anything we produce will be, will have that attributes. Okay? This is why when we create laws, we have to keep changing them. Why? Because they're not perfect. Okay? We discover, 20 years later, man, that was stupid. Why do we institute this law? We got to change it now. Okay? We thought it was good at that time, but we never realized that it had social, repercussions that we'll only see 20 years down the road because we don't have that foresight. We don't know the future. Now, compare that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His attributes. It means that all the regulations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why when we argue in terms of morality, we have a stronger ground. Right? For the secular point of view, the humans are creating it, naturally will be flawed. For Muslims, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so it carries the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means that all the Islamic regulations and rules and boundaries that are legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they carry the attribute of wisdom. Right? And what is, if we want to define wisdom, basically the simple definition for wisdom is putting something in the right place in the right time. Okay? Right place, right time, that is wisdom. Okay? And so the one who had created the human being, right, obviously knows what is suitable for that creation, what is suitable for them in every time and place. And if we look at Islam, Islam is suitable for every time and place. And so when we talk about our moral value, that it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it has that perfect wisdom. It has the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala associated with it. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created the creation and knows what's best for it. Right? أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Does He not know whom He had created? And He is the subtle, acquainted. Right? Allah knows what's best for us. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places rules, it is meant to, overall, to bring what's best for us in this world and the hereafter, and protect us from what is harmful in this world and the hereafter, whether it is immediate or in the long run. And so if you understand that, this comes from the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, He knows what's best for us. Right? Whether it's at the individual level, the family level, the social level, the societal level, the world level. All these things go hand in hand with the legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He knows what is best for them. What is it that's going to allow them to flourish, and what's going to result into their destruction? It's as simple as that. It has the attribute of justice. And I'm talking about absolute complete justice. And please don't confuse justice with equality. Two different things. Sometimes equality in a certain time, that is justice. But what is more appropriate is equity. Okay? Equity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just in all His rules and regulations. It has the attribute of perfection. Right? Al-ihkam, perfection. Because if we look at this legislation, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it also has perfect, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfection, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes are all perfect. Right? So this is the position when as Muslims, we're arguing from. Okay? This is why we should not doubt what Islam says about these things and not try to change them and give them a new narrative that is contrary to what has been legislated for. Right? The legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect and complete, and this is why it's suitable for every person, every time span, or every place. It has the attribute of mercy. Yes, the entire legislation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. It is. Right? And once again, whether we understand or we see its mercifulness at this point or not, it's irrelevant. Because once again, we are limited, we are flawed. We might not realize that it's actually merciful until later on in the future, right? When we see things unfold in a specific way and realize, subhanAllah, this is truly what was better, right? And so all these things, right, when you put them in together, when you talk about morality, and I think we're just going to, I want to open it for a question a little bit. If we look at it, right, if this entire discourse, if we understand the discourse of the LGBT narrative has turned into more of a moral discourse, right? We need to understand and first understand that really it is a moral thing. Now, if it is, we need to start engaging in an argument. Do they have real moral values or not? Are they suitable or not? Are we on the right position or not? And how do we argue it from a moral standpoint, right? How do we argue it, right? We have to be confident in our legislation, right? So we won't buy into the other side, and we have to understand that that the source of morality is not the human being, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We come from a theocentric worldview. What does theocentric mean? Theo means what? No. Theo means God, right? Theo means God. Theocentric, which means God-centric worldview, right? So our worldview is God-centric, which means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center of our life, and everything is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Is that understood? The secular worldview is not theocentric. What is it? Egocentric. It is. It is egocentric. It's not about me, myself, and I. Have you heard that before? It is me, myself, and I. What is the most important thing in this world? Me. Followed by myself. Followed by I. Right? Okay, so let me explain this. There is huge resistance, okay, when it comes to anything that would restrain an individual's ability to act upon their desires. Right? We hear this sometimes when, like, even from kids, right? This has nothing to do with you, it has to do with me. Why are you stopping me from having fun? Right? I'm not harming anybody. Does this sound familiar? It's not about harming anybody or whatever. You never know if you're harming anybody or not, right? It has multiple dimensions. But this is more of a very egocentric view, right? My opinion is important. My pleasure is more important. My prayer, my pleasure, my freedom will trump the family, community, and society. It doesn't matter. It comes first. And by the way, in social, social behavior and psychology, when they look at the more of the community values, they divide, different like different things that they look at. One of the things they look at is whether it's an individualistic society or more of a family-oriented society. Individualistic society, the most important thing in the society is what? The individual, right? The most important thing in that society is the freedom, and it trumps everything else. On the other side, there are other societies that are very family-oriented. It's no longer the individual that's important, it is the good of the family, right? The community. Right? So decisions are not based on the individual, it is based on what is best for everybody else. Now, if you try to place a person who comes from a very individualistic ideology and put them in a family that is family-oriented, are they going to get along? No. Not even with what should we watch today. Simple thing, what should we watch on TV, right? And you watch something they don't want, what are they going to do? Are they going to sit with you? We have kids, right? What do? They walk away, grab their phone, play something else. It's no longer family, right? That comes from that subtle understanding. But anyway, I kind of went off track. I'll stop here. Next session, inshallah, we're going to look at, we're going to start breaking down, right? Looking at the past, because we want to understand where the LGBTQ kind of came from. So we need to look at where things were in the past in terms of sexuality and norms, sexual norms, prior to what is considered the sexual revolution. We're going to look at the events and ideologies that paved the way for that sexual revolution. We're going to look at the catalysts that kind of removed the final barrier that allowed the sexual revolution to happen. How sexual revolution gave birth to the LGBTQ narrative, okay? And also the plan that was proposed to alter the entire Western morality, right? So that's next time, inshallah. In the following time, if you don't have time to finish everything, we're going to look at discuss how certain moral concepts differ based on a person's worldview. So we're going to compare the Islamic worldview and the non-Islamic worldview. We're going to challenge certain claims by the Western worldview that talk about desires and actions and identity, right? So they combine certain things that are not supposed to combine, and they separate between certain things that should be together, right? This is where the challenge, understanding how to navigate this, how to discuss this, right? Because these are all built on premises and assumptions, right? We have to figure out what they are. We're going to challenge the narrative of denying any sort of normative relationship between the biological sex, gender identity expression, and sexual orientation, right? Are they connected? Are they separate? We're going to have all that discussion, right? That is in the following one. And I might add a fourth session, more to address is perhaps misconceptions that are posed by LGBT advocates to justify that movement, and how to respond to some LGBT advocates in a very political way, perhaps, and how we can engage and serve those who are struggling with perhaps same-sex attraction, right? So this is more now the solutions towards the end and understanding misconceptions. But if you notice, I'm trying to go into this as much in depth as much as I can, without being, I don't know, too boring, I guess. I'm going to try as much as I can. But it's a really important topic, right? And it is, once again, it's rooted in a lot of concepts, right? Philosophical ideologies. That is the root of it. And really, in the end, it comes from whether we follow a theocentric world, right? Or more of an egocentric, secular world view, right? This is the fundamental aspect of it. Yes? So if they are old enough to ask, sorry, repeat the question? All right, the question is, how do we answer children, for example? Are we going to get into how can do we answer children if they ask specific questions? For example, if something comes on the screen that you're watching of I'm going to say drag queen, perhaps, right? and the child asks a question, why is this person doing this? Okay? So if they're old enough to ask a question, they're old enough to deserve a suitable answer without dancing around it. Don't dance around it. Okay? It is okay to start saying at that age, right? In Islam, one, two, three. Right? They don't know because perhaps they're not Muslims or they're doing something that is wrong. It is okay to do that. You have to train them since they're young that it's okay to be different. Right? That we have our boundaries, right? That are given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I need to explain, right? That this is legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and this is what is best for us. We want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once again, we're going to use a language that is suitable for their age. Right? But it's important also to install into them when they're young the true nature of what the Islamic family system is. Like you have to do that, right? It's not just about LGBTQ, but it's even about promiscuity, having illicit sexual behavior outside of marriage. No, you have to talk about the family structure is between a male and a female, right? We can talk about Adam and Hawa, and all the relationships happen between in the bonds of marriage and so forth. All these are even you can mention in the form of story, but you're kind of planting this from the beginning at a young age for them, right? And so when they ask those questions, they already have a foundation to discuss. So it does require an effort from our side, but it has to be more now of an organized effort, a conscious effort of the stories that we pick, right? And it's better if it's rooted in Islamic stories. It can always be utilized that way. Right. Yes? Yes. So, here's where you can start the discussion, right? You don't. So it depends if you're having this as a group. Is this heated discussion or a casual discussion where it comes from all these things? So you have to take that all into account. But if a person is saying, right, there's no religion, right, in this aspect, and so say, fine, we'll sorry. Oh, somebody say something. Right. So ask them a simple question, right? Hey, listen, right? How do we decide what is right or wrong? You're going to have to force them to the point where we need to agree, in this case, based on your worldview, that truth is relative. For you, this might be right. For me, it's something else. What gives you the right, to charge my view of what is right? You're going to neutralize them. They're going to be forced to not say anything. What are they going to say? Right? They have no basis to argue. It becomes more now of an opinion. Your opinion, my opinion, whose opinion is correct? Right? So you can side them that way. If they're more open to a discussion, obviously, by the way, it is true. Most of these ideologies and the theories have been mostly propagated by atheist philosophers. Most of them, right? Even lawmakers that have been pushing this in the beginning were mostly atheists. That is true, and this is how we understand this, or we understand how this is how we realize where it got to essentially. If they want to discuss, is there really a God or not, that becomes a different discussion, right? But you can play their game. Their game is a losing battle, essentially. How do you determine what's right or wrong? Allah a'lam. نعم يا شيخ. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yes. Yes. آمين. جزاكم الله خير. آمين. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm. What is the question, Sheikh? What is the question, Sheikh? What is the question? Not necessarily, right? Um, if we're talking about what is halal and haram, that is what changes, right? But there are certain times where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell you, after this period, that's it. Now, when we're talking about morality, we're talking about the final last revelation, right? Because this last revelation, نسخت جميع ما قبلها. It abrogates everything in the past. Because it's meant to be the final and last revelation. So the question is, by the way, like he's talking about, just to clarify this, and it's a very valid position, that previous prophets would have different legislations of what is halal and what's haram. So in this case, morality changes over time. But no, but that's not what we're talking about. Okay, so at that time of their time, this is what was moral or not, because Allah dictated at that time. But when we're talking about in our modern time, we're talking about since the revelation of Islam was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, because that abrogates everything else before it. This becomes the final and last truth that Allah decreed and wants until the end of time. Is that clarify it? Jazakumullah khair. So before I take this question, I was signaled that chai is in the hallway, and I have to make this because I always try to give time for people to go drink their chai, but you guys just never leave, right? I'm not, like, alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khair, it means, inshallah, that you're engaged, but it puts me in a very tough spot with some of the organizers who bring in the chai. So if you're free to leave, I'm not holding you, right? If you stay here, I'm declaring right now, I'm not keeping you, okay? I'm just saying, right? Anyway, sorry. All right, so your question is, if I get this right, we are born with a natural inclination for to do what is right. That is actually a very philosophical question, right? Are we born with the inclination to be good, right? Or are we born with the inclination to do bad things and we need Allah to correct it, right? So our natural inclination, is better to think of it more as a fertile land. Okay? Your natural predisposition, think of it as a fertile land. It is prepared to bring out what is good, but it requires water. That water is the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Without it, whatever comes out can be weed, can be things that are corrupted. So we do have innate predisposition, but it doesn't mean it cannot be corrupted. It could be corrupted. Okay? How would it be corrupted? By false ideologies, misconceptions, the bad environment, away from the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All these things will result in the corruption of our innate predisposition. So yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did create us with innate predisposition, but it requires more things to bring it out. It is there, right? But it needs to come out, and whatever brings it out is that revelation. Does it make sense? Sorry? So we're not having the nature and nurture argument, right? Allah created us with a certain thing, but yes, so denying that the environment has an influence is not wise, put it that way. We, as Muslims, we do acknowledge that environment has an effect, but is it the only effect? Is it the only thing? No, we understand people have inclinations. The environment can improve it, or corrupt it, or do other things, right? Does it make sense? All right. I'm just, I actually have that like in inshallah the third or fourth section. I think this is one of the things, but uh, I am searching to make sure that it's there, because if it's not, I'm going to put it as a question. طيب. Um, so I do have this question there, right? So this is in the section of addressing LGBT misconception and advocates. One of it is that they claim that scientific evidence indicates that homosexuality is normal. Okay? So we will address that. That's a very good question. Right? So, but the funny thing is, if we accept that, then it opens a whole huge door of people that can claim, why is it okay for you but not okay for me? I was born with, I don't know, the tendency to be attracted to young children or animals. Why are you preventing me from fulfilling my needs? Right? That can open a very, very dangerous door. Well, we'll discuss it, inshallah. We'll discuss it. Type. Any more questions? Chai time? We'll save them for next time. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Yes. Oh, you had a question? I apologize. I cannot hear you. I still cannot hear you. Of course, they're going to label it as homophobic. It's a tool. Once again, it's a bullying tool, right? If you're not going to agree with me, then you must be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But like just homophobic means what? Irrational fear of. Right? Do I really have irrational fear of them? No, that statement is like you're a liar, right? You're lying about this. First of all, I have no irrational fear of any individual, but also I don't care about the person. I more care about the action, right? Two different things. Here's where Muslims separate between action and feelings, right? In the Western worldview, unfortunately, we're going to talk about this. They no longer separate between feelings and action, okay? We're going to talk about that later on, inshallah. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.